Morning, everyone. Welcome to another of our daily devotions. This morning, we're going to begin to look at Psalm number 11. Let me read to you the first few verses of that psalm. David is the author of the psalm, and he says this: "In the Lord I take refuge. How can you say to my soul, flee like a bird to your mountain? For behold, the wicked bend the bow, they've fitted their arrow to the string to shoot in the dark at the upright in heart. If foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? The Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes see, his eyelids test the children of man." What do you do when you're facing a choice in life? A choice that has come as a result of things in life for you having gone pear-shaped. And people you know and people you love and people you respect, people that you know love you, have a concern for you, have your best wishes at heart, they come and they give you advice. "Robert, I've been thinking about your circumstances and how things have turned out for you. This is what I think you should do." Well, that's very much the situation here in Psalm 11. The hinge on which the verse turns really is verse 3. "If the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do?" A more free translation of that goes like this: "What can the righteous do when everything falls apart?" The phrase, "the foundations are destroyed," or "when everything falls apart," it could point to a breakdown in the principles of truth and righteousness that underpin society. And if this psalm was written, as some think, during the time of Absalom's rebellion, at least in the early days of his rebellion, then certainly everything that had for a while seemed solid underfoot had begun to fall apart for David. It looked like he was no longer going to be king. He was no longer going to be able to live in the palace. He was no longer safe. He was going to probably end up a fugitive on the run in order to save his life. There was no one place that he could stay that he would feel safe. The very foundations of his life had been destroyed. Everything seemed to be falling apart. Or it may have been a different circumstance altogether, just where enemies were attacking David and his friends come and give him advice. So when in those early days of Absalom's rebellion, or when facing enemies in a different situation, his friends and those who love him saw what was happening and come to him, giving him advice, they say to him, "David, run for your life." That's what David alludes to here. "How can you say to my soul, flee like a bird to your mountain? For look, the wicked are bending their bow. They have fitted their arrows in the string to shoot in the dark at the upright in heart. What can you do now that everything's falling apart?" They're saying to David, "Go, David, run. Get away from here." In many senses, it was good advice. David needed to preserve his life. Should David do what has been urged upon him by those who love him? There's no doubt it was loving advice. It was well-intentioned. It was practical. But we need to go back to verse 1 to see what David thought when his friends come to him with this advice. And in verse 1, the very first words are these: "In the Lord I take refuge. How can you say to me, flee?" This is David's starting point. In the Lord I take refuge. As far as David was concerned, this was his anchor. This is what would hold him in the storm of life that he was facing. In the original Hebrew, that word, or those words, "in the Lord," is emphatic. It's as if David takes out his pen and underscores these words 2 or 3 times. So after repeating the words of his friends and companions in verses 2 and 3, David reiterates his faith and confidence in God in verse 4. Look at what it says in verse 4. The Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes see, his eyelids test the children of men. To stand firm or to flee, that was David's choice. His friend's advice was, David, get yourself away from this. Save yourself. And there are times when flight from difficult circumstances, dangerous circumstances, is the right choice. Jesus said to his disciples in Matthew 10 verse 23, if you're persecuted in one place, flee to another. So sometimes getting away from a dangerous, difficult, distressing situation is the wise, prudent thing to do. When I succumbed to severe depression in my first congregation, less than a year after being ordained, those who were lovingly concerned for me advised me to leave the ministry. Although to me, it felt like a faithless, cowardly way out. But I came to realise it was, in fact, at that time, the right and wise decision. My trust was still very much in the Lord. I would have to trust the Lord just as much in walking away from the ministry as I would had I been able to stay. But it's knowing what to do when things in life fall apart. Well, the place to begin is where David begins. In the Lord, I take refuge. I want to read to you some words from Dale Ralph Davis, who has written a little commentary on Psalm 11. He says this, haven't you faced this dilemma if you're a Christian? You can't tell whether a projected path in life is prudence or unbelief. How do you tell the difference between a Matthew 10:23 situation, when you're persecuted in one place, flee to another, and a Psalm 11:1? When should you run? When should you stand? When should you flee? When should you fight? When should you seek cover? Or should you risk danger? The most religious, well-intentioned counsel may lead to living via unbelief. How can we tell the sane and the unfaithful apart? How we need the ability to discern what is best. Dale Ralph Davis is saying there's times in life when it's difficult to know what to do. But the place to begin is always in the Lord. I take refuge. That no matter what pathway we choose, we do so fully trusting the Lord. And whenever difficulties come, whenever things do fall apart, that's where our hope and our trust must be rooted. Hope you have a great day, folks. God bless.